Hi guys, how's it going? It's Since the Skeleton here. Be sure to like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification bell for more content. Thanks! Welcome back to Dealing with Dragons by Patricia C. Reed. Chapter 12, in which Cimmerian calls on a dragon and the Stone Prince discovers a plot. The shortcut to Roxham's worked just as well as Cimmerian had hoped, and she even made up some of the time she had lost earlier. Roxham was in, too. She could hear the scraping of his scales as he moved around inside. She stepped up to the entrance of the cave and called, "Dragon Roxham!" Something round and shiny flew through the air, missing Cimmerian by inches. It hit the wall of the tunnel with a loud clang and slid rattling to the floor. Cimmerian jumped. "Roxham!" she shouted at the top of her lungs.
"What's this?" the dragon said, poking his nose out of the cave.
"I am Cimmerian, princess to the dragon Kazul, and I offer you greetings and good fortune in all of your endeavors." Cimmerian thought it best to be particularly polite in case Roxham were in a bad mood. She suspected he might be. In her experience, someone in a good mood did not throw things at visitors.
"Very good," Roxham said. "Nice to see you again and all that, but I haven't got time for visitors at the moment. Sorry."
"I'm not a visitor, exactly. Kazul sent me with a message for you."
"Oh, well, that's different. Just hand me that shield there, would you?"
Cimmerian picked up the shield from the floor of the tunnel. There was a large dent in one side where it had hit the tunnel wall, and several smaller ones over the rest of it from banging against things on its way to the tunnel floor. "You ought to be more careful," she said severely. "Just look at this."
"Ha!"
Roxham snorted, examining the dents.
Shoddy work. That's the problem. In my day, you could roll a knight in full armor down the far side of the Vanishing Mountains and bounce him off 2 or 3 cliffs without so much as scratching his surface, much less denting it. This cheap modern stuff just doesn't hold up."
"If you know it doesn't hold up, you shouldn't throw it around like that," Cimmerian said. "You almost hit me." Roxham shifted uncomfortably.
"Sorry, didn't mean anything by it."
"All right, but next time look before you throw things," Cimmerian said, handing him the shield.
I always have this problem when I try to find something," Roxham confided. "Never know where to look. Gets frustrating, and next thing you know, I'm pitching armor at walls. Bad habit, but hard to break."
"Maybe I could help," Cimmerian suggested. "After I give you Kazul's message, that is."
Don't need help to put dents in things," Roxham said. "Comes to that, I don't really want it."
"I didn't mean help throw things," Cimmerian said patiently. "I meant help find whatever you're looking for."
"Oh, that? Well, come in then."
Cimmerian followed the dragon into a moderately large cave, similar to the one Kazul used as a living area. Roxham's cave, however, was full of clutter. Cimmerian had to pick her way past bits of armor, one half of a pair of bookends, a box of tea, a pink scroll, 3 mismatched kitchen pots. Alright, let's go through the list again. Cimmerian had to pick her way past bits of armor, one half of a pair of bookends, a box of tea, a pink scroll, 3 mismatched kitchen pots, a small wooden statue, a broken flute, and 4 partially burned candles. Roxham walked straight over the mess as if it weren't there, squashing a mangy-looking stuffed pigeon and flattening a tin cup in passing. He dropped the shield on a pile of silk flowers and waved Cimmerian to a seat on a large wooden chest near one wall.
"Now, what's this message of Kazul's?"
"It's about the wizards," Cimmerian said, settling gingerly onto the dusty surface of the chest. She made a mental note to find Roxham a nice princess as soon as she possibly could. Alienora and I found one of them picking Dragonsbane a few days ago, and Kazul thinks King Tokaz will listen to you if you tell him about it.
So that's where they got it, Roxam said in tones of disgust. Pity you didn't mention it sooner.
Cimmerine got a sinking feeling. What do you mean?
Somebody poisoned King Tokaz this morning, Roxam explained. Slipped some Dragonsbane in his coffee. Fast acting. Nothing to be done. Now we need a new king.
That's awful, Cimmerine said. Do you know who did it?
Those dreaded wizards, that's who, Roxam said angrily. It's obvious. Stupid thing to do. Has to be wizards, by George. But Warog won't listen to me.
Warog? What's Warog got to do with it?
He's in charge of the investigation, Roxam replied. Taking his time about it, too, if you ask me.
But if the king was only poisoned this morning...
What does that have to do with it, Roxam said unreasonably. Besides, if Warog doesn't hurry, he won't have the culprit in hand by the time the trials start tomorrow.
Trials? You mean the Collins Stone? To choose the new king? Cimmerine said with some hesitation. She did not see how it could be a trial for the person who had killed the king if they hadn't caught him yet. But she was not completely certain that the dragons didn't have some way of getting around the problem and trying to find him anyway.
That's it, Roxam said, pleased. And before I leave, I have to find that emerald I picked up 50 years ago. Coronation present for the new king.
But you haven't got a new king yet, Cimmerine said, feeling somewhat bewildered. What if you're the king?
Roxam smiled broadly. Knew you were a nice gal. Me, the king. I rather like the idea. I still have to find the emerald, though. Wouldn't do to show up at the trials without a coronation present. Wrong thing to do. Overconfident.
Though she was upset and more than a little worried, Cimmerine helped Roxam as best she could. After an hour of poking through the clutter, Cimmerine found the emerald wrapped in a gold-embroidered handkerchief and stuffed into the mouth of a large brass horn. Roxam thanked her and invited her to stay to tea, but Cimmerine politely declined. She was eager to get back to Kazul to tell her what had happened and decide what to do next. Cimmerine hurried back to Kazul's cave by the shortest route, thinking so hard about Tokaz's death that she forgot everything else. She found Kazul sleeping and was forced to wake her, despite her worries about the dragon's health. She knew Kazul would want to hear about the king of the dragons as soon as possible, and she wanted to hear what Kazul made of Warog's involvement in the investigation.
Back already, Kazul said, opening her eyes. Didn't Roxam get you in to see King Tokaz?
No, Cimmerine said. She hesitated, uncertain of the best way to break the news. It was too late.
Too late?
Kazul raised her head, startled. She eyed Cimmerine briefly, then said,
All right, let's have it. What happened?
King Tokaz was poisoned this morning, Roxam said. Roxam said someone put Dragonsbane in his coffee. Kazul snorted.
Somebody knew Tokaz pretty well.
Seeing Cimmerine's surprised expression, she explained.
Tokaz drank Turkish coffee every morning. The stuff is strong enough to take the roof off your mouth. It's why no one ever went to talk to him over breakfast. You could boil a whole field's worth of Dragonsbane in Turkish coffee without changing the taste enough to notice, or the texture.
Cimmerine tried to imagine coffee, even Turkish coffee, strong enough to take the roof off a dragon's mouth, and failed. I told Roxam about the wizard Alienora and I met, and Roxam said I ought to tell Warog because Warog is the one in charge of finding the poisoner, she said. But
when you caught Antarel picking Dragonsbane, he thought Warog had sent you, Kazul said. If Warog's mixed up with wizards...
She broke off, coughing. Cimmerine watched her anxiously, but the coughing spasm did not last long.
I don't like this, Kazul finished when she got her breath back.
I don't either, Cimmerine agreed. But what can we do about it? Kazul frowned and said nothing. For several minutes the two sat and thought in silence. Then Kazul said,
"We can't do anything until the new king has been chosen. Did Roxam say when the test will be?"
"Tomorrow," Simrine said.
"Tomorrow!" Kazul surged to her feet. "Why didn't you say so at once? If I'm to be at the Ford of Whispering Snakes tomorrow, I have to— Lie down!" Simrine commanded.
Kazul looked at her in surprise and collapsed in another fit of coughing. Simrine waited until the dragon's coughing had subsided, then said sternly, "You're in no condition to go hauling rocks all over the countryside. I'd be surprised if you can even fly as far as the end of the pass. I think you're going to have to give up on the trials this time around." Kazul made a choking noise. Simrine looked at her in alarm, then realized that the dragon was laughing.
"That's not optional, Princess," Kazul said. "All the adult dragons in the Mountains of Mourning are required to show up, no matter what condition they're in.
But
there is no acceptable excuse for missing the testing of a new king," Kazul repeated. "None. And I have a great deal to do before I leave, so if
anything needs to be done around here, I'll do it," Simrine said firmly. "If you don't rest, you won't be able to fly at all, and then how will you get to the ford?"
"Reasonable point," Kazul said,
settling reluctantly back into place.
"Very well. The first thing I need is a coronation present for the new king. There's a jeweled helmet on a shelf in the second storeroom that might do. Bring it out so I can take a look at it."
Simrine spent the rest of the evening running errands for Kazul. Besides choosing a coronation gift, Kazul rejected the helmet and 2 crowns before deciding on a scepter made of gold and crystal. Innumerable messages had to be delivered to various dragons who were in charge of arranging the trials. This one had to be informed of Kazul's ill health so that it would be taken into account when the order of the testing was established. That one had to be told that Kazul would not be able to join the coronation process. Procession. Substitutes had to be found to perform Kazul's various ceremonial duties. Then their names had to be approved by a surly dragon in charge of protocol. And finally, the substitutions had to be recorded on all of the lists of all the dragons who were managing each of the events. It reminded Simrine strongly of Linderwall and her parents' court. By the time the last arrangement had been made and the last message delivered, it was very late and Simrine was exhausted. She was also very glad she had not let Kazul do all the running around. The dragon, who had slept most of the time Simrine was out, was looking much better even in the dim light of Simrine's lamp. Tired out but satisfied, Simrine went to her room and dropped into bed. Simrine was up early the next morning, stirring a dozen ostrich eggs in a large iron kettle for Kazul's breakfast. Kazul ate all of them, then slid out of the cave and prepared to leave for the Ford of Whispering Snakes.
"Don't fret, Princess," Kazul said. "The testing doesn't start until 10. I have plenty of time to get there, even if I stop to rest now and then." Her voice sounded much better than it had the day before, and no longer seemed to rasp in her throat. "While I'm gone, why don't you visit Warog's princess? See if she's noticed anything odd these past few days. We need to know as much as we can before we talk to the new king about Warog and the wizards."
"All right," Simrine said, "as soon as I'm done with the dishes." Kazul turned and leaped into the air, her wings churning clouds of dust from the dry surface of the ground. Simrine squinted after her and shouted, "Good luck!" Kazul's wings dipped in answer before the dragon soared out of sight behind the shoulder of the next mountain. Simrine stood looking after Kazul, her forehead wrinkling in worry. After a moment, she shook herself and went inside. She had work to do. Washing the dishes did not take long, and as soon as she was done, Simrine set off to visit Alienora. The tunnels and passageways were silent and empty, and Simrine's footsteps echoed eerily through the darkness. She began to wish she had taken the longer route along the outside of the mountain. She had not realized that the Dragon City would seem so strange and lifeless with all the dragons gone. Psst, Cimmerine! Psst, Cimmerine! Cimmerine jumped. She whirled in the direction of the voice, raising her lamp like a club, and Alienora stepped out of the adjoining tunnel into the circle of light. In one hand, she clutched a large bucket, 3/4 full of soapy water, and she looked rather pale. Alienora, Cimmerine said, lowering her arm. What are you doing out here? Shh, Alienora said. She looked nervously over her shoulder. Warog told me to scrub off the table in the banquet room while everyone was away, and I heard someone moving around in there, even though everyone but us is gone, and I dropped my lamp and... Oh my goodness, Cimmerine said. The Stone Prince! I forgot all about him! Who? The Stone Prince! Quickly! The Stone Prince! Quickly, Cimmerine explained how she had found and hidden him the day before. I hadn't thought about it until now, but this is the perfect time to get him out of the mountains, she finished. All the dragons are gone and no one will see him. Come on, before I forget again. Alienora nodded dubiously, and the two girls headed for the banquet room. When they arrived, Cimmerine called, Are you there? It's me, Cimmerine. Yes, I'm here, said the Stone Prince, unfolding stiffly from a gray lump in the corner. I'm glad you're back. Who's this you've brought with you? Princess Alienora of the Duchy of Toron Marsh, Cimmerine said. She's the princess of the dragon Warog just now. Does her father need a great service done for him? The prince asked hopefully. Not that I know of, Cimmerine replied, unless you're good at getting rid of ants. But that would be more of a service to Alienora than to her father. I can think of nothing that would make me happier, the prince said with evident admiration as he bowed stiffly to Alienora. Good afternoon, princess. Or should it be good evening? It's hard to tell without windows. Alienora blushed and looked down at her bucket without answering. Actually, it's good morning, Cimmerine told the prince. I'm sorry it took me so long to come back for you, but, well, a lot has been going on. Alienora looked up sharply. You've been sitting here in the dark all night? She shuddered. You could have at least left him a candle, Cimmerine. Thank you for the thought, Princess Alienora, but it's just as well she didn't, the Stone Prince said. If I'd been sitting there with a lit candle, they would have noticed me right away. And an unlit candle isn't much use in the dark, is it? What do you mean, Cimmerine said. Who would have noticed you? The dragon and the two men he was talking to, replied the prince. I think they were wizards. What? Said Cimmerine and Alienora together. Well, they talked as if they were wizards, the prince said. They weren't carrying staffs, though. What did they look like? Cimmerine said. Both were tall, they both had beards. The older one's was gray and the younger one's was brown. Antrell and Simnar, Cimmerine said. And they were talking to a dragon. The Stone Prince nodded. Then they wouldn't have been carrying their staffs. Dragons are allergic to them. Did you hear what they said? Something about a contest, the prince said. The wizards were going to fix it so that this dragon would win. It sounded like a kind of cross-country race, and the wizards were going to hide along the path and help the dragon out somehow. I'm afraid I'm not very clear about that part. Spells aren't my specialty. I'm much better at hopeless causes. Alienora and Cimmerine exchanged appalled glances. The trials with the Colin Stone to pick the new king, Alienora said. Which dragon? Cimmerine asked urgently. Do you know which dragon they were talking to? I only heard the name once, the prince said. He sounded apologetic and a little embarrassed. And I don't think I got it right. It's too silly. Tell us, Cimmerine commanded. Well, it sounded like warthog, the prince said, in an even more apologetic tone than before. Could it have been Warog? Cymrine asked. That's it, the prince said. I knew it really couldn't have been Warthog.
It's a pity you remembered, said a voice from the entrance into the banquet hall.
Cymrine whirled. Aunt Ril stood in the doorway, staff in hand, watching them with an intolerably smug expression. And that is the end of chapter 13. Hope you enjoyed the listen and have a good night.